Questions orales, oral questions. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I know that the Prime Minister is eager to get out of Ottawa so that he can start his summer vacation. But summer vacation is getting more and more expensive for Canadians thanks to Liberal tax hikes. Want to enjoy a nice cold beer? There's a new Liberal tax on that. A refreshing glass of wine? A new tax on that. Even a tax on taking the family to the campsite for the summer. And these taxes will go up year after year forever. Yeah. So can the Prime Minister tell hard-working Canadians why he doesn't think they should enjoy their summer vacation just as much as he does?
Good question.
Right on to the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as part of my summer plans, I'm going to be doing what millions of Canadians will be doing, which will be enjoying Canada's national parks absolutely free of charge. For our 150th birthday, we have given all Canadians free access to our national parks to get them to enjoy the natural beauty of this country. On taxes, we're proud on this side of the aisle that we've actually lowered taxes on the middle class and raised them on the wealthiest 1%, which, quite frankly, it remains a shame that those members opposite voted against raising taxes on the wealthiest 1%.
We've voted against raising taxes on hard-working Canadians, and we will always do that.
As parents are preparing for summer, child safety is their top concern. And if a high-risk offender lives in the neighborhood, people are entitled to know that, and Liberals can't hide it. No one is better at protecting their children than parents. Can the Prime Minister finally confirm that he will make the information available to parents so that parents can protect their children this summer? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the protection of children and our communities is a top priority for this government, as it is for any government in this country of any political stripe. Mr. Speaker, we take that responsibility very seriously. We are working with the police services to ensure that if there are criminals or people representing a danger or risk, appropriate measures are taken. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Parents, my kids will be home from school this summer, and like most parents, I'll be encouraging them to get outside and play around the neighbourhood and to stay safe. And the Prime Minister can help parents protect their children by sharing information on high-risk child sex offenders living in our neighbourhoods, not just with the police, but with parents themselves. But the Liberals want to hide that information from Canadian parents. Why is it that the Prime Minister seems to like every single kind of registry, except for one that will actually help parents protect their kids?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we know that it's extremely important to protect our communities and our children. We take that extraordinarily seriously, like any government would. We do not pretend that it's not something that they would do. We would do this as well. They have done this. They put forward proposals that were unfunded and that didn't actually were able to be implemented. We take very seriously giving our police officers and public security officers the necessary tools to keep our families and our communities safe. And that's what we will continue to do.
Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister allows communications companies to be sold to please the Chinese, well, that's something that concerns our allies. Michael Wessel, ahead of the Commission, has said that Canada's approval of Norsat to a Chinese entity raises serious national security concerns for the United States. My question for the Prime Minister is simple. What is wrong with undertaking a national security view, a comprehensive one, on this very specific transaction? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All transactions of that type must be verified by national security agencies, and in this situation we're also consulting our allies. I can say that we have consulted the United States on this specific case. As a government, we respect and follow the recommendations by our allies and national security agencies in this country.
What the hell does that mean?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is jeopardizing. The Prime Minister is jeopardizing our national security. They're jeopardizing jeopardizing our national security interests, and our allies are taking notice. Can the Prime Minister explain what is wrong with holding a national security review, a full, comprehensive national security review? Is he going to do it? Yes or no? It's a clear question. It deserves a clear answer.
The right honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every transaction of this type under the Investment Canada Act is carefully assessed by all national security agencies. On top of that, we do consult with our allies, and in this case, directly consulted with the United States on this situation. Our national security experts assessed the deal and the technology and concluded there were no national security concerns. We always follow the advice of our security experts on these matters.
The honourable member for Outremont.
How can the Prime Minister claim that there were no national security concerns when there has been no national security review, Mr. Speaker? That review only takes place when the minister responsible for the statute orders it, and there has been no such order. Now the Prime Minister is trying to invent a new category of careful assessment. Can he please tell us the legal distinction between a national security review provided by statute and a careful assessment that is provided nowhere?
Right honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every single transaction of this sort is subject to a national security review. This is a multi-step assessment process, and that process was followed. We take advice and feedback from our national security agencies very seriously, and based on that advice, we proceeded with this transaction. In this particular case, our security agencies consulted with key allies, including the United States, and I can reassure the member and this House that we will never, ever compromise on national security.
Honourable member for Outremont.
What the Prime Minister just said is demonstrably false. There has not been a national security review. That has to be ordered by the minister, who never ordered it, and we know that because the company put it out in an official statement to try to reassure investors. That's why the Americans are concerned now, because there's never been a national security review. Est-ce que le Premier ministre...
Can the Prime Minister understand that that is why the Americans are starting to look into the issue, because a national security review was never undertaken as provided for by statute? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we followed the recommendations of our national security agencies. The member opposite knows full well that we respected the process, that we did the necessary due diligence, and that we did our homework. I would remind the honourable member that all transactions are subject to a national security review. In this specific case, I can reassure the member that our national security agencies consulted with important key allies, including the U.S. Never would we compromise national security.
I imagine the minister will have no trouble making public what the Americans did say in this case, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister attempted a partisan appointment that led to scandal. The nomination was removed, and now we are proposing a way forward, not to benefit our own party, but to increase accountability for all Canadians. We've even offered to amend our proposal in order to address the Liberals' stated concern. So, will the Prime Minister take this opportunity to improve the nomination process, because it is important for this House and for all Canadians?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when we came to office, we did improve the nomination process, which is why we now have 60% of our nominees were women, over 12% are visible minorities, over 10%.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The appointments we make are based on merit and reflect the full diversity of this country. We continue to follow the processes which include opportunities for committees to weigh in, which include votes in the House for officers of Parliament, and demonstrate the kind of openness and transparency the Canadians voted for when they elected this government.
The Honourable Member for Outremont. Order.
C'est le Premier ministre qui...
The Prime Minister is responsible for the fiasco surrounding the appointment of Madeleine Meyer. And if he considers that successful, well, then I can't wait to see a failure, Mr. Speaker. He now has an opportunity to ensure that the next appointments will not be tarnished by his partisan appointment. The NDP put forth a proposal to ensure that partisanship isn't part of the process. Will the Prime Minister accept our proposal to help with appointments in the future? Yes or no? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have in place a process that is merit-based for choosing the best people who reflect diversity. We consulted the opposition parties. We had a vote in this House of 4 officers of Parliament. We, along the way, each step of the way, acknowledge the importance of respecting this merit-based process for choosing the best candidates to serve this country. I thank the members opposite for their keen interest in this independent process. The Honourable Member for Louis-Saint-Laurent. Mr. Speaker, the scandal regarding the sale of a high-tech company to a Chinese company has now become an international scandal because of this government's lax action and approach. The Globe and Mail have reported this morning that a committee from U.S. Congress is concerned and looking into it. And I quote Michael Weasel, Canada may be willing to jeopardize its own security interests to gain favor with China. The U.S. military should immediately review their purchases to determine what security risks might arise. Now, they're the ones lecturing us, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister rise and say once again that he's made a mistake on this important file? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I don't agree with my colleague opposite. National security is an absolute priority for our government. All transactions are undertaken under the Canada Investment Act involve a national security review, which contains several steps. We have never compromised national security. The Honourable Member for Louis-Saint-Laurent. Well, as he said, there's nothing to understand in that. We're talking about a national security review. It wasn't followed. The government's trying to play with words. If it wants to play with words with parliamentarians, that's one thing. But now the U.S. military doesn't find this funny at all, doesn't agree with this lax attitude. When will the government acknowledge that it's made a mistake and that the impact is being felt on national security?
Mr. Speaker, unlike the member opposite, we actually value the advice given by the national security experts. The feedback that they gave us was based on the fact that they did their due diligence, they did the homework, they followed the process. And based on that feedback and advice, we took the course of action, Mr. Speaker, to proceed under the Investment Canada Act. We never have, Mr. Speaker, and we never will compromise on national security.
Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals brushed off the concerns of 2 former CSIS directors, a former ambassador to China, regarding the slapdash Sunny Way's sale of Canadian defence technology to a communist dictatorship. But while the Liberals may be willing to jeopardize our security interests selling Norsat for a trade deal with China, they have clumsily put at risk relations with our best friend, trade partner, and protector. Now that a congressional committee is urging the Pentagon to review this risky deal, will the Liberals order a formal national security review?
Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, we've done our homework. We've followed the process. And our national experts have consulted our allies as well, Mr. Speaker. All transactions under the Investment Canada Act are subject to a national security review, Mr. Speaker. We never have and we never will compromise on national security. And with respect to the overall objective of the Investment Canada Act, we're looking forward to seeing more investments in Canada to grow the economy, to create jobs and opportunities, and to strengthen the middle class, because that is our #1 priority, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Parry Sound, Muskoka.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Americans are the latest to sound the alarm bells over this takeover, Mr. Speaker. And just yesterday, before the National Security Committee of this Parliament, when I asked the question directly to the acting director of CSIS, he made it clear, Mr. Speaker, that the decision around security due diligence was not made by CSIS, was not made by the security agency. It was made by the Liberal cabinet, Mr. Speaker. They made the decision. That was the testimony before committee. So when will this government make it clear to everyone that they put Canadian security interests ahead of Chinese security interests?
Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, let me be absolutely clear. We never have and we never will compromise on national security. We will always advance our national interests. And more importantly, unlike the members opposite, we actually value the feedback, the advice that we get from our national security experts. Based on their advice, based on their feedback, we have proceeded, Mr. Speaker. We've been very clear about this process. This is a multi-step review process. We've done our homework, we've done our due diligence, and we will always make sure we follow the advice given to us by our national security experts.
Honourable Member for Milton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government gets a fail on doing their homework, and I'll tell you why. The Act is very clear. When you take a look at an investment, you determine whether or not you take that second step to do a national security review. They determined they didn't need to take that second step, and there have been eminent people coming forward to say they should have slowed their roll. They should have actually taken that step to look further into the details. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ask the Minister very clearly, why did he not order a national security review? Is this not in contravention of our defence policy interests?
Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, did Canada's national security agencies examine this deal? Yes, they did. Did they consult our allies? Yes, they did. Do they have all the facts? Yes, they do, Mr. Speaker. Did the government follow the security agency's recommendations? Yes, we did, Mr. Speaker. Let me be absolutely clear. We never have and we never will compromise on national security.
Member for Milton.
Then why didn't he take the very simple step of requesting a fulsome national security review? What's the anxiety on the other side of dealing with the Chinese? Is it trade matters? Does it have to do with something else that the Canadian Parliament has not been informed of? Mr. Speaker, the reason why the Investment Canada Act was amended to include this part was to deal with these situations. Now, they may be blind to it. We're certainly not blind to it. So are they going to do the right and proper thing, protect Canadian interests, and order the national security review?
Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite can speculate, innuendo, can come up with all these theories. The bottom line is we followed the process. We've been very clear, we've been very transparent with Canadians that we never will compromise on national security. More importantly, we will listen to the advice and feedback given to us by our national security experts. We followed that advice, Mr. Speaker, and let me be very clear. When it comes to our economic interests, our number one priority is to grow the economy and create jobs. That is why over the last 6 months, close to 250,000 good quality, full-time, resilient jobs have been created in the Canadian economy.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont, La Petite Patrie. The Liberals are going to sign an exchange of information agreement with the Cook Islands, a well-known tax haven. The Minister of Finance defended the position by saying it would prevent the wealthy from hiding their money, but that's untrue. The only thing this treaty is going to accomplish is that it will enable rich people to not pay taxes. By signing agreements like that, Canada is hindering international community efforts to deal with tax havens. Even the Minister of Finance in the United Kingdom has denounced them. When will the Minister of Finance stop helping his rich Bay Street friends to hide their money in tax havens? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Our government is protecting the Canadian tax system, and that's why we have invested some $1 billion over the past 2 years to deal with tax avoidance and evasion. Our investments are unprecedented and are yielding results. $13 billion we recovered last year. 122 taxpayers in the Panama Papers who are being audited. Criminal investigations are underway, and Mr. Speaker, we'll have additional news to be shared with you over the course of the day.
The only thing the Liberals are protecting are wealthy interests. Under NAFTA, Canada is the most sued country in the world under ISDS provisions in Chapter 11. We have a progressive court system, yet we are continually forced to defend ourselves under an unfair and unaccountable process. The Liberals cannot continue to leave Canadians in the dark when it comes to their priorities. When will this government come clean with Canadians about their trade priorities and move to eliminate Chapter 11 from NAFTA?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Canada-U.S. Relations.
Mr. Speaker, as has been said on numerous occasions, we're ready to come to the negotiation table, something the previous Conservative government failed to do when it was their turn to look up to NAFTA and get it going. As we've seen, NAFTA has been modified 11 times throughout its history. The Prime Minister, the Minister, all the Ministers of Cabinet, and indeed the entirety of the House is dedicated to the Canada-US relationship. We're going to stand up for Canadian values and our economic interests, as we have always done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Beauport, Côte de Beaupré, Île d'Orléans, Charlevoix. Order, please.
L'ADN controversé.
The Liberals' controversial DNA is surfacing again. Conflict of interest prevails in the office of the Minister of Heritage. We've learned that her Chief of Staff, Leslie Church, participated in a number of meetings between her department and Google, where she used to work. We know that Google has an unprecedented access to the Minister's office and the Minister's team, and that reviews to the Broadcasting Act will be undertaken shortly. Can the Minister ensure us that the process for the reform will be independent, transparent, and free of all political interference? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage. As we have said, Mr. Speaker, on several occasions, industries are facing several obstacles because of the digital change in the industry. And there are reforms that are being put in place in the light of this. The in-depth knowledge of Ms. Church make her an essential asset in assessing how to better support the sector during this transition. Ms. Church has always been 100% transparent as regards her previous employer, as with the Commissioner for Ethics.
Mr. Speaker, another day and another conflict of interest in the Heritage Minister's office. We know now that Leslie Church, the Chief of Staff to the Heritage Minister, has met on at least 6 occasions with Google representatives. Leslie, of course, was the former head of communications. It just so happens of Google before the minister hired her. The law requires the ministers and staff to avoid real and apparent conflict of interest, and it looks like to me the Minister has failed yet again. So why did the Minister allow her Chief of Staff to engage in this clear conflict of interest?
Mr. Speaker, we've said it many times, creative industries are going through a period of disruption brought on by the digital shift. The Minister has met with all major digital platforms as part of a review of Canadian content in the digital age. Ms. Church's experience, expertise, and broad knowledge of the digital landscape is essential to our assessment of how to best support this sector during this transition. She has been fully transparent about her former employment, including with the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner.
Member for Barrie Innisfil.
Yesterday, the Parliamentary Secretary for Shared Services Canada brushed off our call to have the deleted email scandal referred to the Director of Public Prosecutions. You'll recall, Mr. Speaker, I asked why this hasn't been sent to the Director, because the emails were deleted by a Liberal Party Riding Association president who is also an employee of Shared Services. The Attorney General, a Liberal, and the Parliamentary Secretary, a former Liberal Party National Director, should not be even close to this. Why won't the Minister do the right thing and refer this matter to the Director of Public Prosecution?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
Speaker, I can assure the House that our government expects all of our employees to meet the highest level of ethical behaviour and decision-making as set out by the Values and Ethics Code for the public sector. Shared Services, whose management dealt with this issue directly, took the situation very seriously, immediately launched an investigation and notified the Information Commissioner, who in turn, of course, referred this matter to the Attorney General of Canada, as is customary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Barrie Innisfil.
When a Liberal insider deletes 398 pages of emails off a government server, the last people Canadians trust to investigate this are Liberal ministers and Liberal parliamentary secretaries. This is a clear violation of the law. This must be referred to public prosecutions because Liberals investigating Liberals is anything but open, transparent, and accountable. Mr. Speaker, what are the Liberals hiding? And what were in those emails that they don't want anyone to see?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can assure the honourable member that all processes have been followed, that the Information Commissioner, who is an independent authority, referred this matter to the Attorney General of Canada. I can assure that this matter was dealt with expeditiously by the management of Shared Services Canada, and I can assure the honourable member that his unwarranted attacks on the independent public servants who go about their business every day and do things by the book is also very well noted. Mr. Speaker, this is more of what we've come to expect from these people on the other side of the House.
Order. The honourable member for Nanaimo Ladysmith.
The Liberal childcare announcement is a drop in the bucket, and those on the front lines are giving it a failing grade. The Child Care Advocacy Association says the Liberals' approach, quote, goes against all the evidence that quality childcare is critical to the healthy development of all children. Liberals attacked the NDP's plan for universal affordable childcare, saying it was too little too slow. But even Paul Martin's childcare plan offered more annual funding than this. Why are the Liberals checking a box rather than giving real support to Canadian families?
Honourable Minister of Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to be given the opportunity by our colleague to say how honoured and privileged I was yesterday to sign the first ever national agreement on supporting early learning and childcare across Canada. Mr. Speaker, I think, Mr. Speaker, we should all be delighted with this outcome, especially since this is going to give us the opportunity to work over the long term to build a system that is going to support.
Honourable member for Vancouver East.
Government officials told Inland Refugee Society of BC that they, quote, cannot be seen to be supporting undocumented refugees. Really? So much for the Prime Minister's hashtag Welcome to Canada. Inland is the only NGO in BC that provides immediate support for inland asylum seekers and does it with only a budget of $180,000. With a little bit of support from this government, they can prevent this organization from shutting its door. So why is this government choosing to abandon these vulnerable refugees?
Minister of Immigration and Refugees.
Mr. Speaker, je suis fier.
I am proud of the commitment of our government to welcome those who are leaving war, terror, and persecution.
Of our government's plan to continue a robust asylum process, we've provided this year over $700 million in the settlement of refugees and the services that we need to integrate them into our country. I'm proud of the fact that in Budget 2017, we're providing $62.9 million for legal aid specific to refugees. We are continuing our leadership on the refugee file, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Markham Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday was a great day for Canadian families. We saw clear advancement in the government's promise to re-engage in early learning and child care.
Families and social development update the House on the advancement of this important initiative.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and congratulations to our new colleague from Markham Thornhill for her outstanding support to families. Investing in early learning and childcare helps strengthen Canada's middle class and support those working hard to join it. Yesterday, for the first time ever, the federal government, provinces and territories signed a national agreement on childcare to better support Canadian families, to give Canadian children the best possible start in life, to increase gender equity, and to build a more inclusive society.
Honourable member for Niagara Falls.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in June 2015, our Conservative government passed the high-risk child sex offender registry, and since then, the RCMP have been working to implement this publicly accessible database. But now the Liberals are telling us that they have no money to fund it. Well, that is ridiculous. The Liberals have been telling us they've got billions of dollars for anything, Mr. Speaker, so nobody is buying this argument. Now, this database will help protect the safety and well-being of children against dangerous and high-risk child sex offenders living in their neighborhood. I say to the Liberals, do the right thing now. It's not that hard.
Yeah. Honourable Minister Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, the critical tool in terms of public protection is the National Sex Offender Registry, which was created and funded in 2004 by the former Public Safety Minister, the Honourable Anne McClellan. That is a very useful instrument when an offender is about to be released. If there's a danger, then the correctional system notifies the police, and the police make sure, if there is any danger in the situation, that they work with the local community to keep Canadians safe.
I asked the honourable member for Huron-Bruce to apologize for using unparliamentary language. The honourable member for Huron-Bruce.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize if the minister was offended by my comment. He apologized for that.
The honourable member for Mégantic-les-Rables. Mr. Speaker, let's talk about doing things seriously. In Quebec, we had a story of a man who was found guilty of violence against children, and he'll be on this registry until 2021. And this man was able to become a foster family, Mr. Speaker. Despite being on the register, nobody in his region knew that this man was a sexual predator. The security of our children is the responsibility of the Prime Minister. When we understand that this kind of situation can't happen.
The Minister of Public Safety.
The way to ensure that families and children and communities are safe is to make certain that national institutions like the Correctional Service of Canada work closely with the police forces of Canada and the local communities to ensure that people have the information they need. And in those circumstances, Mr. Speaker, that is the best way, that kind of partnership and teamwork, to ensure that our communities are safe.
The honourable member for Peace River, Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to Deputy Commissioner Peter Henschel's own testimony, June 4th, 2015, and I quote, "The RCMP destroyed the records between October 26, 2012 and October 31st, 2012, with the exception of the Quebec records, which were maintained pending the outcome of a Supreme Court decision. When that decision was rendered on March 27, 2015, the RCMP deleted the remaining Quebec records April 10th to 12th, 2015. Someone isn't telling the truth, Mr. Speaker. Can the minister explain why he is saying something different than the RCMP?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, the previous government was deeply embroiled in an argument with the Information Commissioner because it was alleged by the Information Commissioner that while an outstanding access to information complaint was being made, the previous government had taken steps to improperly remove and destroy that information. That was the position taken by the Information Commissioner. She took the government to court. She launched a constitutional challenge, and is that unseemly mess that we are trying now to unwind with legislation before this House.
The honourable member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
There's a problem with what that minister just said, Mr. Speaker. The Quebec data was ordered destroyed after a failed appeal at the Supreme Court, and further confirmed destroyed April 2015 by the RCMP Deputy Commissioner Peter Henschel. The Information Commissioner didn't ask for the data until June 2015, 2 months after it was allegedly destroyed by the RCMP. Someone is not being honest here, Mr. Speaker, and Canadian law-abiding firearms owners deserve to know the truth. If the long gun registry data is not destroyed, the minister is saying the RCMP didn't tell the truth at committee, a serious accusation. An equally serious accusation is that someone illegally preserved the data. Which is it?
The Minister of Public Safety.
Well, Mr. Speaker, all of those events about which the honourable gentleman complains, in fact, took place under the previous administration. If he's got a problem with that process, he should ask his colleagues who formerly occupied those cabinet positions.
Order. Order.
Order.
The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, after attempting to appoint Madeleine Meilleur as Official Languages Commissioner, the government continues to put its friends in the federal administration. The Minister of Transport appointed 3 new administrators to the Port of Halifax, administrators who clearly or seem to not have the necessary qualifications, but who have one thing in common: thousands of dollars in donations to the Liberal Party. Mr. Speaker, Canadians have had it up to here with patronage for donors. So the question is, when will the Liberals end partisan appointments? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, we have put in place a new appointment process which is open, transparent, and merit-based. Our goal is to identify highly qualified candidates who will respect the principle of equality between men and women and who reflect Canadian diversity. Canadians can continue to apply for all these positions online. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Mr. Speaker, while the Heritage Minister is focused on an export-based strategy, which is now pushed back to September, we urgently need to get the CRTC to reverse its bad decision to reduce our content on our screens. The Minister knows very well that all cultural stakeholders are asking the CRTC to go back to the drawing board, and artists still don't know if they can count on this Minister to send this decision back to the CRTC. Will the Minister tell our creators that she will fight alongside them to reverse the CRTC decision? Will she send it back to the CRTC? Yes or no? She has to side with culture. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, our government firmly believes in the importance of arts and culture, and that is why we invested over $1.9 billion in the cultural sector. That's the biggest investment of the last 30 years. We did that because we are convinced that arts and culture are an important economic driver in our economy. We are currently studying the impact of this CRTC decision.
Member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, since the trade war between Boeing and Bombardier started, it has become abundantly clear the Liberals will not be sole sourcing Super Hornets. This point was reaffirmed over the weekend as the Defence Minister stated that the government was looking at all the options to replace our CF-18s. But what options is the Minister actually talking about? Mr. Speaker, will the Liberal government walk away from the wrong-headed policy of an interim purchase and instead immediately launch an open competition to replace all of our fighter jets?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defence. The failure of the Conservatives to renew our fighter jet fleet has forced us to consider a purchase of 18 interim fighter jets until the full replacement fleet is fully operational to protect Canadians' sovereignty and to respect our commitments with NORAD and NATO. We have still not made a decision on this file. And our discussions must show that the intermediate fleet will have the appropriate capacity level and that it can be obtained. Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to tell my colleague from across the way that 98% of Canadian experts have published a report today showing that we don't have a capability gap and that we don't need this interim fleet. Also, for a year now, they've been talking about buying 18 Boeing Super Hornets, which would apparently miraculously save our Air Force. But now that the government considers that Boeing isn't a trustworthy partner, the Liberals are just making it up as they go along. Can the Minister tell us what plane they're going to look at now, and will they show transparency finally on this file? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. As the government has clearly said in the new defence policy, a modern fighter fleet is necessary to defend Canada's airspace and sovereignty, particularly in the north, to ensure the safety of our continent and contribute to peace and international stability. This purchase will give the Air Force a sufficient number of aircraft to control our vast airspace and maintain our ability to contribute to international missions.
Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are planning on closing Canadian Coast Guard stations in Gimli, Selkirk, and Kenora. This weekend, the Coast Guard in Gimli saved a 10-year-old girl and a 7-year-old boy who had drifted off the shores of Lake Winnipeg. Thousands of Canadians, including commercial fishers, recreational boaters, and children, rely on the Coast Guard in our inland waters. Their safety depends on it. Will the Prime Minister put politics aside, commit to keeping the Coast Guard stations in Gimli, Selkirk, and Kenora open, and protect our families?
Well, Minister of Fisheries, SGP, Canadian Coast Guard. Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to increase the capacity of the Canadian Coast Guard in all parts of the country to conduct the search and rescue missions they do so effectively. I share the member's view that this was an important and significant effort, and we congratulate the Canadian Coast Guard and glad that they were able to provide that service. And Mr. Speaker, I can tell the House that on inland waterways where we're currently providing a search and rescue service, there will be no cuts. In fact, there will be increases in the capacity of the Canadian Coast Guard to provide these search and rescue services. Come on.
I have the honourable member for Cloverdale, Langley City.
Mr. Speaker, since the Government of Canada announced that admission to all Parks Canada national parks and national historic sites would be free during Canada's 150th year, we've seen a public outpouring of interest from Canadians across the country. This is a phenomenal way for Canadians to experience the natural beauty and extraordinary history of the country we call home. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change please tell this House how Canadians have responded to this offer and what they can expect at national parks and national historic sites throughout this very special year?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, thank you to the member for Cloverdale Langley City for his advocacy for his constituents and for parks. Parks Canada places belong to all Canadians, and as part of Canada's 150th celebrations, admission to all of Canada's national parks, historic sites, and marine conservation areas are free in 2017. So far, over 6 million free Parks Canada Discovery Passes have been sent to Canadians and to people in 194 countries around the world. This year, millions of people will visit these remarkable places and experience firsthand Canada's natural beauty and its leadership in conservation and science. Thank you.
The honourable member for Foothills.
Mr. Speaker, do you know what the definition of out of touch is? It's when an uber-wealthy finance minister tells Canadians they aren't paying enough taxes. Yesterday, in defense of his new tax on beer, wine, and spirits, the minister said Canadians need to pay their fair share. Well, here's the sober reality. Under these Liberals and their tax hikes, many Canadians are already finding it difficult to make ends meet. When will this minister put an end to what is nothing more than an escalating cash grab?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, let's review the facts. We reduced taxes on middle-class Canadians. Average for family, $540 less per year. Average for an individual, $330 less per year. And we did that by raising taxes on the top wealthiest 1%. Now, what we're doing here is making sure that our system is less complex, more efficient, and fair. And what we're doing is we're creating stability for business to invest and to create jobs over time. That's what we're aiming for, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Mr. Speaker, last month the Kingston Airport sealed up a hangar which starved and eventually killed a decades-old colony of barn swallows. Some 80 nests of these threatened birds were lost needlessly. And this was done apparently to adhere to Transport Canada policy. Such action during the breeding season would be an offence under the Species at Risk Act and the Migratory Birds Convention Act. Do the Minister of Transport or any of his officials have any knowledge of this action?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
I have an easy answer. No, I do not know of this particular situation, but I'll be happy to sit down and discuss this after the session. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cumberland Colchester.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The RCMP are considering a proposal to consolidate Nova Scotia emergency communication centres in one area. However, their own RCMP report says on page 36, it is not recommended that the two largest police communications operations in Nova Scotia be placed within the same metropolitan area. Then on page 37, the RCMP report says primary communication sites should be outside of HRM due to risks, Mr. Speaker, risks of placing two largest police communication centres in close proximity to each other. How can the RCMP even consider a proposal which their own report says will put Nova Scotians at risk?
Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, communication support is obviously obviously crucial to frontline RCMP officers. I'm aware that the force is conducting an internal review to examine service delivery as well as current facilities and human resource requirements in Nova Scotia. The honourable member has obviously also been vigorous and meticulous in advancing his point of view and promoting the interests of his constituents, for which I commend him. When the review is completed, recommendations will be presented to the Divisional Executive for a decision.
Order. The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, last week the Health Committee sent a letter to the Minister stating that the criteria for the 2015 thalidomide compensation package needs to be changed to be more inclusive for survivors and to err on the side of compassion. These thalidomide survivors have endured a lifetime of grief, agony, pain, suffering, and discrimination. When will the Minister do the right thing, change the criteria, and help these Canadians?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said in this House before, obviously we are all concerned with the tragedies that took place as a result of thalidomide, and it's important that people are compensated accordingly. It's important that people are treated fairly. I thank the Health Committee for their work on this matter. We are reviewing their report, and I look forward to responding to it in due time.
The honourable member for Repentigny. Mr. Speaker, on Saturday, Jean-Pierre Blais will leave the chairmanship of the CRTC, and it would be really unfortunate if his term ended on such a low note. The license renewals for Série Plus and Historia create a dangerous precedent for the future of television production in Quebec. And yet the parliamentary secretary says that they're studying this decision, but will the Minister of Heritage use the power that she has under the law not to study this, but to cancel this decision of her own initiative and cancel this CRTC decision? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, as I said, our government firmly believes in the importance of arts and culture, and that is why we have invested over $1.9 billion in this sector. That's the biggest investment in the last 30 years. We did that because we're convinced that arts and culture are an important economic driver for our economy. We are currently studying the impacts of this CRTC decision.
Honourable member for Nunavut.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Public Services and Procurement. In February, I and other Indigenous members of Parliament, in the spirit of reconciliation and goodwill, sent a letter to the Minister asking that Langevin Block be renamed. There is a compelling social justice reason for this name change. Hector Lavalin was the key architect to the disastrous residential school system, a system that has had a devastating and lasting impact on Indigenous culture and heritage. Given the government's commitment to truth and reconciliation, when can we expect a response to our letter? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's obviously no relationship more important to our government than the one with Indigenous peoples. I thank the member and indeed all Indigenous members of this House for their very thoughtful intervention in this matter. Our government is fully committed to implementing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. This includes developing a reconciliation framework for Canadian heritage and commemoration, and any decision will be made in full partnership with our Indigenous peoples. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good job.